IB Bio, Plant Biology Part 6, Reproduction A, will focus on the angiospermophytes, the flowering plants. The movie will examine flower structure and then examine the phenomenon of how changing light conditions as a seasonal environmental trigger would stimulate flowering at the right time of year. The essential idea is reproduction in flowering plants is influenced by the biotic and abiotic environment. Here's the outline of all the available movies for Plant Biology, Topic 9 for HL students only. Use this outline to find the movie you need for review. This movie is focused here. Flowers are the reproductive organs of plants. Meiosis occurs within flowers. The sperm and egg are found within flowers. Fruits result from fertilization that occurs within flowers, but plants are not mobile. Thus, the sperm must be moved for plants in order to achieve random fertilization, the random fertilization that maintains genetic diversity within populations. The sperm, also known as the pollen in the case of the plants, is moved by animals, wind, or water. Plants on Earth today include the mosses, the bryophytes, the ferns, the phyllocynophytes, the coniferophytes, the cone-bearing trees, and the angiospermophytes, the flowering plants. All of the movies on plant biology focus on the angiospermophytes. This movie looks specifically at flower structure and then the mechanism by which flowers appear at the right time of year. Remember that angiospermophytes are the flowering plants, and the presence of a flower is the most recognizable characteristic of angiospermophytes. Angiospermophytes also have vascular tissue, bringing water up to the leaves from the roots. Angiospermophytes have sperm that do not have a flagella. Thus, angiospermophytes require other means by which sperm are moved. Mosses and ferns have motile sperm. Angiospermophytes also have a protected seed. Mosses and ferns do not produce seeds. Coniferophytes have a seed that is less well protected than angiospermophytes. Coniferophytes have what's called a naked seed. Flowers are the reproductive organs of mature plants. Meiosis occurs within the flower, producing egg and sperm, and I'll clarify this in the slides to come. In any case, the plant can't move, so the sperm must be moved by animals, wind, or water. This is called pollination, gamete transfer. Pollination is the delivery of the sperm within the pollen grain to a new flower, usually a different flower, which is not the way this diagram presents it. Fertilization results when the sperm, having arrived to the stigma, makes its way toward the egg within the ovary. Then fertilization occurs within the ovary to form the diploid zygote that develops into an embryo within the seed. The embryo within the seed is diploid and is, in essence, plant offspring. Then a fleshy growth surrounds the seed. The seed is dispersed, often by animals, wind, or water, then germinates when the conditions are right, growing into an adult plant, and adult angiosperms flower when mature. Here is a photograph of the world's largest inflorescence, and it can be up to 2 meters tall, and it's composed of small flower clusters. Now, plants must flower at the right time of year. Plants must flower in the season when there are pollinators to move the pollen, within which is the sperm cell. Plants must flower when the temperature and light conditions are suitable for plant growth and reproduction. Here is a photograph of one of the world's widest, if not the largest, individual flower, 1 meter across, 11 kilograms. Remember that plants must flower at the right time of year. Today, industrial flower production involves manipulating the environment of plants to cause them to flower out of season. Manipulating plants to flower out of season might, by some, be considered unethical, but the practice serves the demand for flowers by people at any time of the year in any location. Fruits, as seen in this photograph, are derived from flowers. Any plant structure that has seeds within a fleshy tissue is called a fruit, and the fruit has originated from a flower. Fruits would include apple, cucumber, tomato, zucchini, pumpkin, and so on. The petals of angiosperms are modified leaves for attracting pollinators. Pollinators, like this insect, serve to move the pollen, within which is the sperm cell. Here is the first IB syllabus statement for this movie. Draw and label a diagram showing the structure of an animal-pollinated flower. In this diagram of a flower, meiosis occurs here, the anther, to produce male gametes. The sperm cell lies within a pollen grain. Meiosis occurs here within the ovary to produce the female gamete, the egg. Pollen from a different flower lands here, the stigma, and the sperm reaches the egg through a tube that develops from the stigma to the ovary. Fertilization occurs within the ovary, and the ovary develops into the fruit. The petals of a flower serve to attract pollinators that will move the pollen from one plant to another. As a result of a plant's immobility, mechanisms to move the sperm are important to reproductive success and diversity within populations. The sepal protects the flower bud, the immature flower prior to its emergence. The petals attract pollinators that will move the pollen to a different plant to achieve sexual reproduction and maintain genetic diversity. Meiosis occurs in the anther to produce the pollen, within which lies the male gamete. The male sperm cell lies within the pollen grain. Meiosis in the production of female gametes, eggs, occurs within the ovary. More specifically, meiosis occurs within the ovule to produce the egg. Pollen from a different plant will land on the stigma, and the sperm cell will reach the egg through a pollen tube that grows from the pollen grain through the style to reach the egg within the ovule. Fertilization will occur within the ovule, and the ovary will develop into a fruit. The anther is part of a larger structure called the stamen. The filament holds the anther up high in the flower so that a pollinator, such as an insect or bird, would contact the pollen to pick up the pollen and move it. Now, the ovary and the ovule are part of a larger structure called the pistil. The stigma receives the pollen, and the style holds the stigma up high so that it will contact a pollinator carrying pollen on its body. With this diagram, you can review flower structures and their functions, as I've just done in the previous slides. But in this image, I would like you to notice that the ovary displays 8 ovules. There are more than 8 if we could examine the flower in 3 dimensions. Each ovule contains 1 egg. If every egg is fertilized, then each ovule will become a seed, a diploid baby plant. Here's a chance to review flower structures by name, and you need to be able to state the function of each structure as well. Petal and sepal aside, I've color-coded the male and female parts of the flower. Can you identify which is which? How many ovules are within the ovary here? Where are the eggs formed? Once fertilized, how many seeds would be formed from what we can see in this image? What is the role of the petal? What is the role of the style in the pistil? What is the role of the filament in the stamen? The anther, where pollen are formed, and the stigma, where pollen are received, are held up high by the filament and style, respectively. What is the role of the filament and the style? Why would holding the anther and the stigma up high be advantageous? In this image, where are the pollen formed? And where would arriving pollen land? In this photo of a hibiscus, the stigma is here, and the anthers are here. Now, both the stigma and anthers are held quite a distance out from the petals for the purpose of facilitating pollen transfer, with an arriving pollinator brushing against both the anthers to pick up pollen and the stigma to drop pollen off. Pollen, a multicellular structure, has the male gamete within it. Plants are immobile, requiring a mechanism to move the pollen for sexual reproduction and the maintenance of genetic diversity within the population. Insects and birds, some mammals, wind, water serve to move pollen. The anther must be held up high so pollen can contact a pollinator, and the stigma must be held up high to assist in receiving pollen. Pollen is produced in large quantities within the anther. Insects use UV wavelengths for vision, and flowers are adapted to draw pollinators toward the center of the flower, increasing the chance that there will be contact with the anther and the stigma. As you look again at a hibiscus flower, you should have a stronger appreciation of many structure-function relationships. Flowers are adapted in many ways to accommodate the pollinator for the purposes of moving pollen to achieve the genetic variation that comes with sexual reproduction. This flower has landing surfaces, and the anther and the stigma are in close proximity. And that brings us to the next IB syllabus statement. Explain how flowering is controlled in long day and short day plants, including the role of phytochrome. Let's look at two types of plants that flower at different times of the year. The short day plants flower in the autumn as the days get shorter and, more importantly, the nights get longer. The long day plants flower in the spring as the days get longer and, more importantly, the nights grow shorter. Let's look at long day plants first. Examples include Easter lilies or foxglove. Long day plants flower in the spring as the days get longer and, more importantly, the nights grow shorter. Interestingly, experiments have been conducted where plants were subjected to changing light conditions. When a long darkness was interrupted with a flash of light, the long day plant responded by flowering, as if the short night of spring had arrived. In early spring, when the nights are long and the days are short, the Easter lily does not flower. But in late spring, as the day length increases and night length decreases, the lily flowers. When a long darkness was interrupted with a flash of light, the plant responded by flowering, as if the short night of spring had arrived. Phytochrome is a pigment in plants that is sensitive to wavelengths of light. When the sun is out during the daytime, Phytochrome red is rapidly converted to Phytochrome far red. Phytochrome far red is the active form, keep this in mind. For long day plants, if the day is long enough, a lot of Phytochrome far red is formed, and this stimulates flowering in long day plants. In other words, as the winter gives way to spring and the days get longer, more Phytochrome far red, flowering occurs. Now, while during the day, Phytochrome red is rapidly converted to Phytochrome far red, during the night, Phytochrome far red is slowly converted back to Phytochrome red. Now, this cycle repeats itself every day, but if the day is long enough, then enough Phytochrome far red is formed to stimulate flowering in long day plants. The different forms of the phytochrome absorb slightly different wavelengths. The Phytochrome red absorbs red wavelengths, while the Phytochrome far red absorbs far red wavelengths. Now let's look at short day plants, for example, Chrysanthemum or Poinsettia. Short day plants flower in the autumn as the days get shorter and, more importantly, the nights get longer. Interestingly, experiments have been conducted where plants were subjected to changing light conditions, and in short day plants, when the correct duration of darkness was interrupted with a flash of light, flowering was inhibited. Again, we're looking at short day plants. In late summer, when the days are long and the nights are short, the chrysanthemum does not flower. But in the autumn, as the day length decreases and the night length increases, the chrysanthemum flowers. When a long darkness was interrupted with a flash of light, the plant did not flower, as if the long days of summer were not yet over. During the long days of summer, Phytochrome Red is rapidly converted to Phytochrome Far Red. And Phytochrome Far Red is the active form, and in short day plants, Phytochrome Far Red inhibits flowering. Let me say that again. Phytochrome Far Red is the active phytochrome, and in short day plants, Phytochrome Far Red inhibits flowering. Now, as the days get shorter, less and less Phytochrome Far Red is formed, so that the inhibition on flowering is removed and the plant flowers. Remember, Phytochrome Far Red is the active phytochrome. In long day plants, Phytochrome Far Red stimulates flowering, but in short day plants, Phytochrome Far Red inhibits flowering. Here is a diagram that displays phytochrome control over flowering in a different way. Short day plants will flower if the day length is less than 12 hours, as would happen in the autumn as day length shortens. Long day plants will flower if the day length is greater than 12 hours, as would happen in the spring as day length increases. Here's the same syllabus statement that I read to you earlier, just to remind you of its full detail. Explain how flowering is controlled in long day and short day plants, including the role of phytochrome. And here's a second statement. State that flowering involves a change in gene expression in the shoot apex. Let's take one more look at long day and short day plants. Long day plants will flower when the day length exceeds night length, and sufficient Phytochrome Red is converted to Phytochrome Far Red to stimulate flowering. Short day plants flower when the night length exceeds day length, so that less Phytochrome Far Red is formed during the short days, releasing the inhibition of Phytochrome Far Red on flowering. Thus the plant flowers. Phytochrome is a pigment in plants sensitive to wavelengths of light. When the sun is out during the daytime, Phytochrome Red is rapidly converted to Phytochrome Far Red, and Phytochrome Far Red is the active form. Always keep this in mind. During the day, Phytochrome Red is rapidly converted to Phytochrome Far Red, while during the night, Phytochrome Far Red is slowly converted back to Phytochrome Red, and this cycle repeats itself every day. If the day is long enough, then enough Phytochrome Far Red is formed to stimulate flowering in long day plants. Flowering occurs in long day plants when the days are long and the nights are shorter. Now, if the days are short enough, then less Phytochrome Red is converted to Phytochrome Far Red, so that Far Red no longer inhibits flowering in short day plants. Flowering occurs in short day plants when the days are short and the nights are longer. The flash experiments with short day plants, keep this in mind, led to the theory involving the role of phytochromes in flowering. As a result of the flash of light, P. Far Red was formed rapidly and inhibited flowering in the short day plants. The theory is better understood today. Chrysanthemums are short day plants that would not naturally flower during the summer months when the days are longer. Covering the plants or darkening the room would stimulate flowering. Chrysanthemums and poinsettias are short day plants. Covering the plants or darkening the room would stimulate flowering out of season. This is a photograph of short day plant production, poinsettias in particular. Flashes of light will keep short day plants from flowering. Providing more than 12 hours of darkness will stimulate flowering. And here's an IB syllabus statement that I've previously mentioned. State that flowering involves a change in gene expression in the shoot apex. The relative absorption of red or far red alters the expression of genes in the nuclei of cells in the leaf. Now, the newly expressed genes produce an mRNA that codes for a protein currently known as FT protein. Very, very little is known about FT protein. Some call it florigen, referencing a plant hormone that has not yet been identified. FT protein, or florigen if you would prefer, is moved to the shoot apex. FT protein, florigen, alters the gene expression of cells in the shoot apex, where flowering would occur. Once again, you can see the events here. The photoperiod results in changes in gene expression, resulting in FT protein. FT protein is moved to the apex of the shoot to induce flowering. One last time, the relative absorption of red or far red alters the expression of genes in the nuclei of cells in the leaf. The newly expressed genes produce an mRNA that codes for a protein currently known as FT protein. FT protein is moved to the apex of the shoot to alter gene expression, resulting in flowering. And that brings us to the end of IB Bio Plant Biology Part 6, Reproduction A.